October 11, 1985, 11:42 p.m., East 86th Street, Manhattan. The rain in New York doesn't just fall, it attacks. It turns the pavement into a black mirror, reflecting the neon hum of the Upper East Side. Outside an exclusive, unmarked social club, the air smells of wet asphalt and expensive cologne. A heavy, iron-reinforced door swings open, spilling yellow light and the muffled sound of Frank Sinatra onto the sidewalk. A man steps out. He is wearing a $2,000 Brioni suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, unaffected by the humidity. This is John Gotti. At this moment, he is a rising star in the Gambino family, a man who views the city not as a home, but as an empire he hasn't finished conquering yet. Suddenly the peace is shattered. A heavy-set man, bloated by power and aged by scotch, stumbles out behind him. This is Frank the Beast Terranova, an old-school capo from a rival faction who believes his tenure grants him immunity from politeness. He bumps into Gotti, nearly sending the younger man into a puddle. Terranova doesn't apologize. He sneers, his breath smelling of cheap onions and sour grapes. He looks at Gotti's flashy tie and sees a target. "Get out of my club, bum," Terranova barks, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You're blocking the air. Go find a corner in Queens to rot on." The silence that follows is deafening. Gotti's bodyguards freeze. They know what Terranova doesn't. You don't call a king a bum unless you're prepared to die in the gutter. Gotti doesn't flinch. He slowly turns, a razor-sharp smile cutting across his face, a smile that never reaches his eyes. "You got the wrong guy, Frank," Gotti whispers, his voice smooth as silk but cold as a meat locker. "And you just made the last mistake of your very short life." To understand how a simple insult in a doorway led to the bloodiest transition of power in mafia history, we have to look at the rules of the game. Because in this world, a man's reputation is his only currency. And Frank Terranova just declared bankruptcy. As Terranova laughs and walks toward his Cadillac, he has no idea that the shadow following him isn't his own. It's the beginning of a hit that will change the five families forever. The Ravenite was the heart of the Gambino operations. Inside, the walls were thin, but the loyalty was supposed to be thick. The air stayed thick with espresso steam and the acrid smoke of Marlboros. Gotti sat in the back, surrounded by his inner circle, Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti. They weren't talking about money, they were talking about respect. Paul Castellano, the boss of bosses, had become a white-collar gangster. He lived in a mansion on Staten Island, the White House, and looked down on the street soldiers who actually brought in the cash. "Paulie's forgotten the smell of the street," Gotti said, stirring his coffee with rhythmic precision. "He thinks because he eats dinner with bankers, he's a banker. He's not, he's a target." The tension in the room was palpable. To speak against the boss was treason, but Gotti wasn't just speaking, he was recruiting. He knew the hierarchy was brittle. The Gambino family was a house of cards, and Gotti was the wind. The conflict wasn't just internal. Rival families, like the one Frank Terranova belonged to, saw the friction. They thought they could poke the bear. Terranova had been skimming from Gambino-controlled construction sites in Brooklyn, confident that Castellano was too soft to retaliate. Gotti saw every slight. He kept a mental ledger of every debt, every insult, and every dollar stolen. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a master psychologist of the underworld. He knew that for a man like Terranova, power was a loud, boisterous thing. For Gotti, power was a quiet, inevitable force. "Let them talk," Gotti told Ruggiero. "Let them think we're weak. Arrogance is the best blindfold in the world. When they finally see us coming, it won't be a conversation. It'll be an ending." The decision was made. Gotti wasn't just going to take over his own family. He was going to send a message to every other family in New York. The theme was simple. The old guard is dead. Long live the Teflon Don. But as Gotti plotted his ascent, a wiretap in a nearby apartment was picking up more than just street noise. The FBI was listening, and they were waiting for the first drop of blood to hit the pavement. Special Agent Bruce Mao sat in the cramped, dark van, his eyes burning from hours of staring at grainy black and white monitors. The smell of stale coffee and electronic ozone filled the small space. On the screen, he watched Gotti exit the club. "He's moving," Moore whispered into his headset. The FBI knew the storm was coming. They had been tracking the internal rift in the Gambino family for months. They saw Gotti as a different breed, more dangerous because he craved the spotlight. Most mobsters hid in the shadows. Gotti wanted to own the sun. Earlier that day, Moore had received a tip from a confidential informant. Something had happened on East 86th Street. The word bum was circulating through the underworld like a virus. In the mafia, language is a weapon. An insult to a man of Gotti's stature was a declaration of war. "If Terranova really said that," Mao's partner remarked, "he's a dead man walking. Gotti doesn't do forgive and forget." In the legal world, a crime requires a motive. In the criminal world, the motive is often just an bruised ego. The FBI struggled to stay ahead of the curve. They had the technology, but Gotti had the streets. He had a network of eyes that the government could never replicate. Grandmothers on stoops, delivery drivers, coat check girls. Mao watched as Gotti climbed into a sleek black Mercedes. Gotti looked directly toward the surveillance van for a split second. A chill ran down Mao's spine. It was as if Gotti knew they were there and didn't care. To Gotti, the FBI were just spectators to his greatness. The consequences of the bum comment were already cascading. Terranova's own people were starting to distance themselves. They could smell the gunpowder in the air. In the social clubs of East Harlem, the betting wasn't on if Terranova would die. But how? Gotti's reply that night wasn't just a threat. It was a scheduled appointment. And the clock was ticking faster than anyone realized. The smell of raw beef and industrial disinfectant was overwhelming. This was the territory of the Westies, the Irish mob that Gotti used as his personal enforcers. They were the meat grinder of the city, men who didn't care about the honorable rules of the Italian mafia. Gotti met with a man named Jimmy Coonan. The contrast was stark. Gotti in his silk suit, Coonan in a blood-stained apron. "I need a ghost," Gotti said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the industrial freezers. "Someone who doesn't exist to do a job that can't be traced." Terranova was a capo. Killing him required permission from the commission, the ruling body of the 5 families. But Gotti was done asking for permission. He was playing a different game now. By using the Westies, he created a layer of plausible deniability. Coonan nodded. He didn't need a name. He knew who the target was. The whole city knew. Terranova had been bragging at a bar in Queens, telling anyone who would listen how he put that peacock Gotti in his place. He was digging his own grave with his tongue. "It has to be loud," Gotti instructed. "I don't want him disappearing. I want people to see what happens when the old world insults the new one." This was the effetto lenda, the legend effect. Gotti understood that fear isn't just about the act, it's about the theater. He wanted the hit to be a spectacle, a public execution that would serve as his unofficial coronation. The cost of this decision was immense. By bypassing the commission, Gotti was essentially declaring war on the entire mafia structure. He was betting everything on one move. If he failed, he'd be the one in the meat grinder. If he succeeded, he'd be untouchable. As Gotti left the plant, he received a phone call on a secure line. Terranova had just booked a table at Sparks Steakhouse for a peace meeting. It was the perfect trap. The rush-hour traffic was a nightmare. Yellow cabs honked incessantly, and the sidewalks were packed with shoppers and office workers. In the middle of this urban chaos, a hit team was positioning itself. 4 men wearing long tan trench coats and black Russian-style hats stood at different corners. They looked like characters out of a noir film, but their pockets were heavy with semi-automatic pistols. They weren't looking at the Christmas lights. They were looking for a black Lincoln Continental. Inside a nearby car, Gotti sat in the passenger seat, watching through tinted windows. He was the conductor of this dark symphony. "Is the target in sight?" Gotti asked over a walkie-talkie. "Not yet, but the table is set," came the reply. This wasn't just about Terranova anymore. Paul Castellano, the boss himself, had also been invited to this meeting. Gotti was going for the double play. He was going to wipe out the man who insulted him and the man who held the throne in a single evening. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Every siren in the distance made the shooters twitch. They knew that if they missed, there would be no second chance. In the mafia, the only thing worse than a dead boss is a wounded one. The subtext of the evening was loyalty. The men in the trench coats were Gotti's most trusted soldiers. They weren't doing this for money. They were doing it because they believed in Gotti's vision of a more aggressive, more profitable family. They were tired of the businessmen in Staten Island. They wanted the streets back. Suddenly the Lincoln pulled up to the curb. The door opened. Paul Castellano stepped out, followed by his driver, Tommy Bilotti. Frank Terranova was already inside, waiting by the bar, blissfully unaware that his bum comment had just brought the Reaper to the door. The shooters began to move. Gotti lowered his window just an inch to witness the moment his life would change forever. The first shot sounded like a firecracker. Then came the roar of the choppers. Paul Castellano never even saw the men in the trench coats. He was hit in the head and chest before his feet even hit the pavement. Tommy Bilotti tried to reach for his piece, but he was cut down in a hail of lead. Inside the restaurant, the glass shattered. The diners dived under tables. Frank Terranova, hearing the chaos, ran toward the door, thinking his bodyguards were arriving. Instead, he ran straight into the nightmare. One of the gunmen, a man Gotti had handpicked for his coldness, stepped into the foyer. He looked Terranova in the eye. "John says hello," the gunman whispered. Terranova's face went pale. In that split second, he remembered the rain on 86th Street. He remembered the silver-haired man he had pushed. He realized that the bum was the last thing he would ever see. The gunman fired 3 times. Terranova collapsed onto the expensive carpet, his blood mixing with the spilled red wine of a dozen abandoned dinners. The entire hit took less than 10 seconds. It was a masterpiece of violence, precise, public, and devastating. The gunmen didn't run. They walked calmly to their getaway cars, disappearing into the midtown traffic like ghosts. Gotti watched the whole thing. He saw Castellano's body lying in the gutter, the boss of bosses reduced to a heap of expensive wool and cooling flesh. Gotti felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his city now. He had redefined the rules of engagement. But as the police sirens grew louder, Gotti knew the real challenge was just beginning. Killing a boss is easy compared to keeping his chair. The other families would react, the law would react, and the legend of the Teflon Don would be tested by fire. As Gotti's car pulled away, he looked at his hands. They were steady, but on the radio, the news was already breaking. Massacre at Sparks. The commission was a circle of vultures. The heads of the Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo families sat around a table draped in a white cloth. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and resentment. Gotti walked in alone. He didn't bring bodyguards into the room. He didn't need to. His reputation preceded him like a shockwave. "You broke the rules, John," Vincent the Chin Gigante said, his voice a low growl. Gigante was the head of the Genovese family and a man who feigned insanity to dodge the FBI. "You took out a boss without a vote." Gotti took a seat, leaning back with an air of total confidence. The boss was a businessman who forgot he was a soldier. He was letting the family starve while he built mansions. "I didn't kill him. The street killed him. I just provided the tools." The tension was a physical weight. Every man in that room had a hit team on standby. One wrong word, and the basement would become a tomb. But Gotti had something they didn't: the support of the soldiers. The rank-and-file mobsters across the city were celebrating. They loved Gotti's style, his defiance, and his refusal to hide. He was the celebrity gangster, the man the public loved to hate and the criminals loved to follow. Gotti made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He promised a golden age, more construction rackets, more control over the unions, and a unified front against the feds. He spoke with a charisma that was hypnotic. "The bum who stood outside that club is the man who is going to make you all richer than you ever dreamed," Gotti said, a smirk playing on his lips. The commission looked at each other. They hated him, but they feared him more. And in their world, fear is the only form of respect that matters. They voted. John Gotti was officially the boss of the Gambino crime family. But the vote wasn't unanimous. Behind the scenes, The Genovese family was already plotting a counter-hit. Gotti had the crown, but the crown was made of thorns. The media circus was in full swing. Gotti walked up the courthouse steps like he was attending a movie premiere. He wore a different $2,000 suit every day. He joked with reporters, kissed the hands of old ladies, and flashed a smile that suggested he knew a secret the rest of the world didn't. The FBI had finally brought him to trial for racketeering. They had hours of tapes, dozens of witnesses, and a mountain of evidence. But Gotti was unfazed. "They can't make anything stick," his lawyer told the press. This was the birth of the Teflon Don. Gotti had spent millions on his defense, but he'd spent even more on insurance. Jurors were being intimidated. Witnesses were suddenly suffering from amnesia. The power of the bum comment had grown into a myth. People believed Gotti was invincible. Inside the courtroom, Gotti sat with his legs crossed, looking bored. When the lead prosecutor presented a recording of Gotti discussing a hit, Gotti simply winked at the jury. He was performing. He knew that in a city like New York, personality can often override the law. The theme of reputation was at its peak. Gotti wasn't just a man. He was a brand. The Effeto lender was working perfectly. The more the government attacked him, the more the public cheered. He was the underdog from the streets of Queens taking on the bums in Washington. But underneath the bravado, Gotti was becoming paranoid. He began to distrust his closest allies. He suspected that his underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano, was becoming too popular. The very ambition that brought Gotti to the top was starting to eat him from the inside out. He forgot the lesson of Frank Terranova. Arrogance is a blindfold. And while Gotti was busy smiling for the cameras, the FBI was preparing a weapon he couldn't charm his way out of. The verdict was read. Not guilty on all counts. Gotti walked out a free man, but a voice in his ear whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a whisper, or rather, a recording of one. The FBI had managed to bug the apartment above the Ravenite, where Gotti held his most private meetings. They captured something they never thought they'd hear. Gotti trashing his loyal underboss, Sammy Gravano. "Sammy's getting greedy," Gotti's voice crackled on the tape. "He thinks he's the reason we're winning. He's just a soldier. I made him." When the FBI played those tapes for Gravano in a cold interrogation room, the world shifted. Sammy, the Bull, wasn't just a soldier. He was a man of the old school. Loyalty was his religion. Hearing his boss, the man he had killed for, disparage him like a common street thug was the ultimate insult. It was the bum comment all over again, but this time the roles were reversed. Gotti had insulted the one man who could destroy him. "You want Gotti?" Sammy asked the agents, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll give you Gotti. I'll give you the whole damn thing." The consequences were seismic. Sammy Gravano became the highest-ranking mobster to ever turn government witness. The Teflon was finally scratched. The legend was revealed to be a man who let his ego overshadow his strategy. Gotti was arrested in a massive sweep. This time there would be no intimidated jurors. There would be no flashy suits to save him. The hierarchy he had built was collapsing because he had forgotten that a king is only as strong as the men who carry his shield. In his jail cell, Gotti paced like a caged tiger. He realized too late that his reply to Terranova years ago, "You just made the last mistake of your life," was a prophecy that had finally come back to claim him. As the trial date approached, Gotti realized that the bum wasn't Terranova or the FBI. The bum was the ghost of his own pride. The atmosphere was somber. The circus was over. Gotti sat at the defense table, his hair still perfect, but his face etched with the weight of 1,000 crimes. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Life in prison, no parole. The man who had ruled New York from the sidewalk of a steakhouse was now a number in a high-security cell in Marion, Illinois. The transition from the dapper Don to a prisoner was a slow, painful decay. He spent 23 hours a day in a cell, far from the lights of Manhattan and the smell of expensive espresso. The theme of power had reached its final tragic conclusion. Gotti had sought the crown, but the crown had cost him his soul, his family, and his freedom. He died in prison in 2002, a shadow of the legend he had tried so hard to build. In the end, The story of John Gotti isn't just about the mafia. It's about the thin line between respect and ego. It started with an insult on a rainy night, a moment where a man chose to react with violence instead of wisdom. The legend lives on in movies and books, but the reality is much darker. The bum who snapped at Gotti is long gone, and the Don who replied is a cautionary tale whispered in the same social clubs he once dominated. The city of New York moved on. The neon lights still reflect in the puddles on 86th Street, but the era of the celebrity gangster died with Gotti. The question remains, if you were in Gotti's shoes that night, would you have let the comment slide? Or is the price of respect worth any consequence, even if that consequence is a lifetime behind bars? Would you have done the same to protect your name? Let us know in the comments. If you want more deep dives into the shadows of criminal history, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. The next story is already waiting.